أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها وهموم قد كشفتها وعثرة قد عقلتها ورحمة قد نشرتها وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك ولم يكن له ولي من الذل وكبره تكبيرا. الله أكبر.
اللهم
الله
صل على
على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد.
محمد وعجل فرجه. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده والظاهر بالكرم مجده الباسط بالجود يده الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا تزيده الكثرة والعطاء إلا جودا وكرما. إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير مع حاجة بي إليه عظيما وغناك عنه قديم وهو عندي كثير وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إنا عفوك عن ذنبي وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي وصفحك عن ظلمي وسترك على قبيح عملي وحلمك عن كثير جرمي عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي. أسمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك الذي رزقتني من رحمتك وأريتني من قدرتك وعرفتني من إجابتك فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا لا خائفا ولا وجلا مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أبتى عني عتبت بجهلي عليك ولعل الذي أبتى عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك علي يا رب. إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك كأن لي التطول عليك. فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجاهل فارحم عبدك الجاهل فارحم عبدك الجاهل وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك إنك جواد كريم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وآل محمد.
الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح ديان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول عناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق، باسط الرزق، فالق الإصباح، بالجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى فقرب فشهد النجوى، تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعاضده. قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أناديه، ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصي، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة مونقة قد أراني. فأثني عليه حامدا، واذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يحتك حجابه، ولا يغلق بابه، ولا يرد سائله، ولا يخيب آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين، وينجي الصالحين، ويرفع المستضعفين، ويضع المستكبرين، ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاسم الجبارين، مبير الظالمين، مدرك الهاربين، نكال الظالمين، صريخ المستسرقين، موضع حاجات الطالبين، معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها، وترجف الأرض وعمارها، وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا، وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق، ويرزق ولا يرزق، ويطعم ولا يطعم، ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى، وهو حي لا يموت، بيده الخير، وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على
على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد
محمد.
وعجل فرجهم. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك، أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأثنى، وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل كرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين، ووصي رسول رب العالمين، عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك، وحجتك على خلقك، وآيتك الكبرى والنبع العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. وصل على سبتي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي. حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم صل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وحفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعية إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك. استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله. مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له. أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به وانصره وانتصر به وانصره نصرا عزيزا وافتح له فتحا يسيرا واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نسيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله وتذل بها النفاق وأهله وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المن به شعتنا واشعب به صدعنا وارتق به فتقنا وكثر به قلتنا وعزز به ذلتنا واغني به عائلنا واغض به عن مغرمنا واجبر به فقرنا وسد به خلتنا ويسر به عسرنا وبيض به وجوهنا وفك به أسرنا وانجح به طلبتنا وانجز به مواعيدنا واستجب به دعوتنا واعتنا به سؤلنا وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا واعتنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعتين. اشف به صدورنا واذهب به غيظ قلوبنا واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله وغيبة ولينا وكثرة عدونا وغيبة ولينا وكثرة عدونا وغيبة ولينا وكثرة عدونا وقلة عددنا وشدة الفتن بنا وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآله وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله وبضر تكشفه ونسر تعزه وسلطان حق تظهره ورحمة منك تجللناها وعافية منك تلبسناها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتع فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل.
Thank you so much, Brother Fazl, for that beautiful recitation of the holy dua of Iftitah. We'd like to welcome each and every one of you for today's session. I am looking forward to learning from Sayyid Bilal Rizvi. We have been listening to his lectures for the past few days, and he has been tremendous, and he's been working really hard to put this together. I hope everyone's got the PDF. We posted it in the chat and on Zoom and on Facebook, and we emailed it to the PDF about Allama Hilli's proof for God. Without further ado, I would like to invite Sayyid Bilal Rizvi to please come and inshallah recite, and we will join in shortly.
All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We'll start with one Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawm ad-Din. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي دل على وجوب وجوده افتقار الممكنات وعلى قدرته وعلمه أحكام المصنوعات المتعالي عن مشابهة الجسمانيات المنزه بجلال قدسه عن مناسبة الناقصات نحمده حمدا يملأ أقطار الأرض والسماوات ونشكره شكرا على نعمه المتظاهرات المتواترات والصلاة والسلام على صاحب الآيات والبينات الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد. First and foremost, it's a pleasure to join you all. And as it's mentioned, this is an interactive session, so it'll be a little bit less formal. If there's any questions throughout the discussions, you're more than welcome to ask. I just humbly request that if there's talking or speaking in the background, that you mute your mics until you have a question. The beginning khutbah, which I just recited, is an important khutbah, which is found in the source which discusses about Allah and our theological tenets. And I'll give you the translation of the sermon first. And it is my hope that by the end of these two discussions, you'll really understand what the beauty and the profoundness behind this introduction is. And the translation, as you know, it's been provided in the document that I prepared for you. And this document is something I put together last minute, so there are some typos. It's not a final edition for publication or for citation or anything along those lines. But for the to be beneficial for this class, it's sufficient. The opening khutbah, it states that all praises belong to Allah, whom the contingent internal poverty of the contingent beings indicates the necessity of his existence, and the precision of the creation demonstrates his power and knowledge. He is too exalted to resemble the corporeal bodies. Due to the grandeur of his purity, he is free from the suitability of deficiencies. We praise him with a praise that fills the entirety of the world and the skies. And we thank him for his overwhelming and frequent blessings. We seek his help in the driving back of miseries and the removal of distress in all circumstances. You see, this is something you'll notice that when you study just a normal university academic text versus a text which was written in the classical Islamic tradition, is that the texts, even when they begin, it has very profound insight about how one connects with the Creator. And of course, this text was written by a man by the name of Al-Fadil al-Miqdad, who wrote a famous commentary on the work of Allam al-Hilli, which we'll examine today, Al-Bab al-Hadi Ashar. The subject, as each and every one of you know, is a discussion about atheism and establishing the proof of God. Why is this subject matter important is where I'll start this discussion with. And after I end the first part of this discussion, I'll open the floor to questions before moving on. And each day over these next 2 nights, I'll try to cap it at 1 hour. I know it's already late, and with these types of discussions, I really want the mind to be fresh, to be able to absorb. I also encourage everyone to take notes. Although the document is in front of you, if you have a piece of paper and you're writing things down, it'll be something which is much more beneficial and fruitful. So first and foremost, the discussion pertaining to establishing the existence of God, of Allah, is one which affects each and every single human, because there are certain questions that man has been asking for time eternity, whether he is here in America, whether he's in Pakistan or India. And these questions, they include such as, what is the nature of the world? What is our purpose of creation? And did we come here just by mere coincidence, or is there a creator? So you find these questions have been discussed for a very long time. These are not new discussions. But in recent times, you find that there is a new form which has been given to these discussions. And this form has come under what has been called New Atheism. New Atheism is something which is promoted by figures such as Richard Dawkins, such as Christopher Hitchens, such as Sam Harris, such as Daniel Dennett. And the arguments of these people are arguments which almost every youth in this country who's attended college or high school has heard at one point or another. You know, I remember my own experiences in high school with people speaking to me about the arguments of Richard Dawkins. So it's something which is common, and these names, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, are known to more people than they should. So this subject in today's world has an immense importance. You know, many people will say that the existence of God is just a matter of faith, that there is no rational demonstration for it. In the olden days when science was not there, that gap which was created, that gap was filled by the concept of a God. Whereas now that we have modern science, which is able to explain things, we do not need the concept of a God, and it is solely based on faith, not on rationality. This is something you find that Christopher Hitchens, he mentions his line, and I'll quote him directly. He says, because of the surrender of the mind, the eagerness to discard the only thing we have that makes us higher primates is the faculty of reason, and that's always deadly. So over here, when he is speaking about faith, he says that it is a discarding of reason. And what they don't realize is that within the Islamic philosophical tradition and theological tradition, many of the questions which are just now being posed by many of these atheists are questions which our thinkers have answered for 1,000 years. And it's very important for us now today to reclaim this heritage, to understand this heritage, which has been given by the likes of thinkers such as Nasiruddin al-Tusi, such as Allam al-Hilli, such as Ibn Sina, and other names whom many of us have heard, but we may not know in great detail. Now, today's discussion, I'll be discussing a specific proof for the existence of God. But there's one point which I need to mention. And that point is that the existence of Allah and knowledge of this existence is in the fitrah and the nature of every single human being. That's why Allama Tabatabai has a famous footnote where he says that any proof for the existence of God is just a tanbih. It's just an indication to the inner human nature. And this is found in everyone. Once again, I'll quote Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, when he speaks, he says this line, which goes to show that even in his nature, the belief in God is there at some level by virtue of being a human being. He says, because the human mind, including my own, attention to this line, rebels emotionally against the idea that something as complex as life and the rest of the expanding universe could have just happened. Over here, Richard Dawkins says that the human mind, including my own, doesn't find it suitable that life itself can happen without, that life itself can happen without a cause. But it takes intellectual courage to kick yourself out of your emotional incredulity and persuade yourself there's no other rational choice. So the mistake he makes is that he says that there is no rational method to prove the existence of God. And based on this, we'll present a rational method, which is not based upon texts, but it is just based upon intellectual endeavors and philosophical ideals. And through that proof, we will try to demonstrate that the existence of a necessary existent Allah is nothing but mandatory. And at this point, if anyone has any questions, I'll take those questions. If not, I'll move on to the next part. And since I don't hear any questions, we'll move on. You see, the month of Shahru Ramadan, in this month, we perform acts of supplication, we perform acts of prayer, we recite the Quran, and we seek to build a connection with the Creator. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves the question, is that how often do we sit back and we ask ourselves, what do we know about the Creator? For Ma'rifatullah has been considered amongst the greatest of all ulum. As Amir al-Mu'mineen says in Nahjul Balagha, Sermon 1, Afdaluddin Ma'rifatuhu, the beginning of religion is his understanding. And today when I examine, I've prepared for you guys a text. When I examine today, the text I've chosen for the next 2 nights of discussions, where we will examine the existence of God, the proof for this existence, and if time allows, I don't know if time allows, we'll go into the establishment of each of the attributes. The text I've selected is a book called Al-Babul Hadi Ashar, the 11th chapter, and it was written by Allam al-Hilli, who passed away in the 726th year after Hijrah. This book is a fundamental theological textbook which has been taught for centuries. It's a book which contains all of our belief, the Shi'i doctrine within it. Now, the writer of this book, Allam al-Hilli, is an individual who really doesn't need any introduction, a man who has been praised as one of the greatest scholars of the school of Ahlul Bayt, a person who mastered the science of jurisprudence by the time he turned baligh, as it's stated, and he played a fundamental role in the conversion of Sultan Khudaband al-Jaito in towards Shia Islam. Of course, Sultan Khudaband al-Jaito was the 8th Ilkhanid ruler. The Ilkhanids, they were the southwest ruling portion of the Mongol dynasty of the Hulagu household. So Allam al-Hilli had an influence where he answered a very important question about divorce. And because of that, the king became Shia. Of course, it's debated whether he remained Shia. But the point being is that Allam al-Hilli has a very fundamental place in history. The author of this book is a very credentialed individual and is a very established individual. But the question is that why is this book called the 11th chapter? Because the name on the outward, it sounds a bit strange. So the reason it's called the 11th chapter is because Allam al-Hilli was working on organizing a book of Ash-Shaykh al-Tusi and organizing and summarizing that book. That book was about supplications. It was called Misbahul Mutahajjid, Was-Silahul Muta'abbid, the lamp of the performer of the night prayer, and the weapon, the argument of the one who seeks to worship Allah. So when he organized this book, which was about dua, into 10 chapters. And after organizing into 10 chapters, Allama al-Hilli said to himself that, I worked on this book which was about dua and supplication. But when a person makes supplication, he really needs to understand the one whom he is supplicating to. So he added an 11th chapter to this book. This 11th chapter was about the tenets book. It came to be born, and it is called Al-Babul Hadi Ashar. And the specific version, which I will be examining different portions of the commentary on, are by a man named Al-Fadil al-Miqdad, who was a student of Al-Shahid al-Awwal, and he has an important commentary on this book called An-Nafi' Yawm al-Hashar fi Bab al-Hadi Ashar, the benefactor on the day of judgment, in the commentary of the 11th chapter. And we'll examine these arguments found within this book in depth. Now, there was one correction, one slight change I want to make. And that correction is that this argument which I'll present today, which is the argument of God based upon necessity and contingency, was called the argument of Allama al-Hilli. A fine correction I want to make is that Allama al-Hilli was not the inventor of this proof or this demonstration or burhan, but rather it is stated that it started with Ibn Sina or probably Al-Farabi before him. Then after that, it was used by other individuals such as Nasiruddin Tusi in his Tajrid al-Atiqad, on which Allama al-Hilli wrote a famous commentary. And you find that it reaches us in this form from Allama al-Hilli. So this discussion, which we'll analyze today, is the rendition of Allama al-Hilli on the famous burhan called Burhanul Imkani wal Wujub, the demonstration of contingency and necessity. Now, in chapter 1 of this book, which we'll discuss, Allama al-Hilli mentions two proofs for the existence of Allah. The first proof is what has been called the argument from design, or Burhanun Nadam in Arabic. And basically in this proof, you argue from the effect to reach the cause. And in this reality, when you look at all of the universe, you see everything is an effect. By looking at the system of the universe, through that you come to conclude there is a creator. The Quran, it alludes to this type of argument and demonstration in chapter 45, verse 13, when it says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. That we will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until they realize that he is the truth. This method, which has been called the argument from design, has also been called the path of Hazrat Ibrahim, of Nabi Ibrahim. Because Nabi Ibrahim within the Quran, in chapter 6, verse 75 to verse 78, he argues based upon this method. When he begins to speak to the people of the town, he says towards these people that my Lord is a star. And when it sets, he says, قَالَ لَا أُحِبُّ الْآفِلِينَ. And then when after that the sun, it comes up, he says, perhaps this is my Lord. When the sun, it sets, no, this can't be it. And the same with the moon. So over here, Ibrahim was arguing from effect to reach the cause. He says that number one, that this sun which declines, anything which declines entails its disappearance. Anything which disappears requires movement and haraka. Anything which requires movement requires creation, so there must be a creator. Now, there's many aspects of this burhan I'm leaving out because it's not my focus for today. My focus is that second argument which Allama al-Hilli presents within this book, and that is the argument from necessity and contingency, or burhan al-wujub wal-imkan. This has also been called burhan as-siddiqeen, the proof of the superbly veracious, the superbly truthful. This argument for the existence of God is solely based upon the concept of wujud, or being or existence. You see other arguments, when they argue for the existence of Allah, They argue based upon a particular aspect of creation. For example, when Aristotle presents his proof, he argues based upon potential, based upon quwwah, and through that he reaches Allah. But over here, we're not arguing based on movement. We are arguing for the existence of God based on existence itself. That if we say something exists, just by virtue of things existing, we can conclude the existence of Allah. And this is why it's called Burhanus Siddiqeen, because the closest Burhan, the strongest Burhan and evidence is when you argue based upon the thing itself, that based upon Allah, you can establish his existence. After establishing his existence, you can establish his attributes. After you establish his attributes, you can establish his actions. And over here, there's one quote I'd like to quote from Mullah Sadra, who, when speaking about this Burhan and the value of this Burhan, he says a line which is worthy of quoting in the Asfar. He says, know that the paths to Allah are many. That Amir al-Mu'mineen says, didn't he famously say, that the ways to Allah are as many as the people breathing upon this earth, or as many as the breaths taken upon this earth. So Mullah Sadra, he says that know that the paths to Allah are many, because Allah has many different aspects. But there are certain ways and paths to Allah which are stronger. That Burhan, that evidence which is stronger, is the one which has less separation from God. See, when you argue based upon a particular aspect of creation, there is a form of separation. But over here, you are arguing from existence itself. And this class is meant to be something very simple. I don't expect anyone to have a background in the Islamic philosophical tradition. I'm very well aware of the different nuances of this Burhan, which some people who have studied this may mention. Some have said, no, you're arguing from existence. You're not arguing from Allah. So Mullah Sadra has his own version. But I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible, because the goal of this course is to benefit the general population so we can have an understanding of what it means for Allah to exist. And if somebody argues or presents arguments such as these individuals like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens, who attack Islam in particular, we have an answer and we have a rational understanding as well of our faith. So with that said, I'll stop. If there's any questions, I'll take those questions. If not, I'll continue to move on.
I have a question. Assalamu alaikum.
Please. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, please.
So in the starting of the lecture, you mentioned that believing isn't the nature of a human being.
Yes.
I have seen personally in my own life people moving away from Allah after waiting for something long enough, after praying to him long enough. And
Yes.
so what I want to ask you is that in the nature of human being to moving away from something? If yeah, so that's it.
I know that's that's an excellent question. So when I say the existence of God is in the nature, we have many hadith and traditions that say kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra, that every child is born on the fitra of Islam. Just as we have a human inner nature, you find nurture impacts us in many ways. That although it is within the nature, you find this inner nature, it may whisper towards us. But because of factors of nurturing, because of external factors, this inner nature of the human being gets suppressed because we do have free will. Although God has created every single human being within themselves perfectly good and aligned with the belief in God, because of the free will, because of the impact of nurture, you find that this understanding is forgotten or it is suppressed, and it takes different forms. So I hope this answers the question sufficiently. If not, I can keep giving a further elaboration upon it.
No, this was good. So basically, our nature can be manipulated.
I mean, listen, at one level, the traditions say it's within our nature, but there are two impacts on a human being. There is nature and there is nurture. If my parents raised me in a certain way, then my beliefs are going to be molded by how my parents raised me. And if I'm raised in a different household, it'll be molded at that level. So the point being is that there are many different external factors which impact the human being. But this is something which it remains in the human being at a certain level. And I gave the example of Richard Dawkins, somebody who is the most staunchest of atheists, but he is saying that even in my mind, this is something which doesn't make sense at a certain level. It's hard for me to grasp that. So it's something which is natural to believe in God. And the Imams, they would argue from this method as well. For example, I gave you the tradition yesterday when a man comes up to Imam as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, and he says, "Oh Imam, guide me to Allah." The Imam says, "Have you been on a ship?" He says, "Yes." And he says, "Has that ship ever capsized?" He says, "Yes." And the Imam says, "When you were in the ocean and no one was around you when that ship had capsized, were you still not hoping towards a higher power?" The man says, "Yes." He says, "This shows that it is in your nature to believe in God." And this discussion of the fitrah is a long discussion, but I think this answers the question sufficiently at this point.
Yes, Jazakallah.
So it's my pleasure. If we have any other questions, I'll take those questions. If not, I'll begin to move forward. So I'll begin to move forward, and I'll have Brother Mahdi keep an eye on the time, and I'll let him, cut us off if we're extending past too late. So to understand this proof, to summarize very quickly, this topic is a very important topic. The argument which we'll examine is a rational argument, is an argument based upon reason, that it concludes just by the fact that different things exist, Allah exists. Now, to understand this burhan, to understand this proof in depth, we need to understand two concepts, and each of them will be explained in its time and place. The first concept that we need to understand are the three modes of existence. What this means is everything that exists, either in its nature, it is wajib and necessary for it to exist, like Allah, or it is contingent for it to exist, meaning it can exist and it can't exist, or it is impossible for it to exist, like a square circle. By its properties, it can't exist, and this will be explained at its spot. The second thing which we need to understand to properly understand and fully internalize this demonstration is the impossibility of an infinite regress or a vicious circle. What I mean by an infinite regress is that many people, they say that, if this created that, then that needs a creator, and that needs a creator, and that needs a creator. And because of that, there will be an infinity. So it's important to demonstrate that this infinity is impossible. And I will demonstrate to you how that infinity is impossible at the appropriate spot. And today's discussion, we'll see how reach maybe 2 nights, today and tomorrow. It'll take place in 5 stages. Number 1, I'll examine the 3 modes of existence, the division of a concept of existence into the 3 types. I'll examine the characteristics of the types of existence, namely wajib al-wujud, the necessary being, and the contingent being mumkin al-wujud. Number 3, proof. Examine the impossibility of an infinite regress or a vicious circle. And each of these points will be examined in depth, and we'll go stage by stage. Now, the first thing which Allama he states, he says that كل معقول إما أن يكون واجب الوجود في الخارج لذاته وإما ممكن الوجود لذاته وإما ممتنع الوجود. He says that for every object of thought, and what do I mean by ma'qul, by object of thought? I'll explain. For every object of thought, either it is wajib al-wujud in its essence, either it is necessary for it to exist in its essence, meaning there is no other option for it to exist. When you think of this concept, existence contingently existing, meaning not exist. And at the third level, it is impossible for it to exist. Everything divides into these 3 categories, and we'll begin to explain what this line is meant. The first thing which we need to understand is that what is meant by an object of thought? That how does an object of thought differ from something in the real world? When I have my phone over here, how does the concept of my phone in my mind differ from my phone in front of me? This is something which is important to understand, because oftentimes we have images in our mind, and via these images we understand the outside world. I'll give you a further explanation. See, a concept, it differs from the actual object of existence. There are many ways which a concept, it differs from the actual object. For example, when I think of an actual elephant is material. It has weight, it has size. But the concept of an element is not material. A concept of an elephant is not material in my mind. If it was material, every time I thought of an elephant, then my mind should have become as heavy as an elephant. So it shows fundamentally they are different. And it is through concepts of things that we understand the outside world. And this is something which many people in the modern world, particularly because of two philosophers, they have rejected this idea. They have said there's no absolute external existence. Everything is relative. Everything is in our mind. There is no objective outside truth. The first of these philosophers was John Hume. John Hume said, the immediate object of human knowledge is our own ideas. Bottom line, there is no certain knowledge of the outside world. We only have our ideas. And then after that, you find Immanuel Kant gave an even more extreme idea. He says objective reality is what we know. It's not that we are knowing things, but what is in our mind, it formulates the world. But the Islamic principle is that there is objective truth. There is a creator who we can understand, and there is truth and reality. And right now we are speaking about what it means for a thing to be a concept as opposed to something in the external world. So at the first level, there are 5 characteristics of concepts which differentiate it from an object in the external world. The first differentiation is that a concept is not material. My idea of my phone, the image of my phone in my mind is not material. It doesn't have weight. It doesn't have size. But this phone in front of me has weight and size. And like I said, if anyone wants to interrupt to ask a question, feel free to. I know these discussions can get complex, but they're necessary discussions to understand the proof at hand.
Syed, one question.
Yes, please.
About these wujuds. Is there any hadith or any narrations that classify different types of existence, different types of wujud?
So that's a very important question that you ask. Are there any hadith on the subject? You know, in terms of direct language, that say that, this is wajibul wujud and this is mumkin al wujud directly, this is something which was in the language of the philosophers. But the concept is there, of course, in the Quran and the hadith that Allah is, for example, completely necessary and everyone depends on Allah, but Allah depends on no one. So we can say the concept is there in the text, but the exact language which I'm using is the language of the philosophers that was used by people such as Ibn Sina, such as Nasiruddin Tusi, and is being quoted over here by Allam al-Hilli. And I hope that answers that sufficiently. So we were discussing the 5 characteristics of a concept. The first characteristic I said is that while a real object in the external world in a cottage is material, the concept in the mind is not material. The second characteristic of a concept is that a concept can be abstracted. What this means is that I have this book in front of me. This book is green. I cannot take greenness out of this book in the external world. But by looking at different things, I can abstract a concept such as greenness. I can abstract a concept such as largeness based in my mind. Whereas largeness in the external world, it doesn't exist. We can have large objects, we can have small objects, but we will not have largeness. So this is the second. The third characteristic of a concept, as opposed to something in the external world, is that a concept can be universal. And what this means is that when we have particular objects in the outside world, it's just one object. For example, this is a book. This is one book. But in my mind, I can have a concept of a book which applies to many books. I cannot have this concept in the external world. If I say to you, point to me a concept book in the external world, which applies to many, it doesn't exist because we only have particular books. But in the mind, I can have the concept of a book. So this is number 3. Number 4, there is relationship between concepts. What this means is different concepts in my mind, they have a relation. For example, I can examine the concept of water in relation to temperature. I can say this is warm water, and this is hot water, and this is cold water, and this is room temperature water. And in this discussion, we'll examine the concept of existence to something in the external world. And number 5, concepts are not changing. Human beings may change, objects may change, but the concept of the nature of a human being does not change. If anyone has any questions on this discussion of concepts, I think I've mentioned in great depth, but if there's any questions, they can ask these questions. If not, we'll begin to move towards the actual Burhan and demonstration. So with that said, now that we understand what Allama says, that when he says, for every object of thought, every concept, in relation to existence in the external world, either it is necessary for it to exist in itself, it is contingent for it to exist in itself, or impossible to exist in itself. So basically, any object of thought has to be one and only one of the following. In the one and only one of the following in our thought. When we think of a concept in relation to existence in the outside world, either it is necessarily existent in itself. We call this wajibul wujud bid-dat. And this is the existence of the necessary being Allah. Allah, by definition of being the necessary being, existence cannot be separated from him. He has to exist. The second is mumkin al-wujud bid-dat. This means something is contingently existent, meaning that either it exists or it cannot exist. And yes, Burhan equals proof, as the question was mentioned over there. Burhan is proof, or we can say demonstration or apodictive proof. There are many different words we can use for Burhan. So number 1, we have the necessary existent in itself. We have the contingently existent in itself, and we have the impossibly existent in itself. For example, a square circle, by the property of something being a square and something being a circle, we cannot have a square circle. In the external world, this cannot exist. Yes, in my mind, I can think of some sort of shape which resembles a square circle, but in the external world, to have a square circle is impossible. And I'll give you an example. To understand the difference between wajib al-wujud, a necessary existent, and a contingent existent, oftentimes, to understand concepts which are not concrete, it's good to give physical examples. And that example which I'll give you is the whiteness of the color white versus the whiteness of a wall. And over here, I'll ask you a question, and I expect somebody to try and attempt to answer the difference. What is the difference between the whiteness of a wall and the whiteness of white? Does anyone have any theories on this? And I won't move on until somebody offers some resemblance of an answer. Does anyone have any propositions on this, on the difference between the two?
I think the whiteness on the wall is made by humans. It's manipulated, and the white color itself is the base and not manipulated.
Okay. Any other theories? Okay. So here's one difference between the whiteness of white and the whiteness of a wall. Does the color white have to be white? You'll say, yes, of course. By definition, it has to have whiteness. It has to be white. But does a wall have to be white? No, a wall doesn't have to be white. There is nothing in the nature of a wall that mandates it to being white. A wall can be blue, it could be black, it could be gray, it could be green. So there is a difference. It is wajib for what, if I use this language, it is mandatory for whiteness to be white, where it is not necessary for a wall to be white. In the same way, for Allah, for the contingent being, it is necessary for the concept itself to exist. That just by the concept existence is mandatory. Whereas for a contingent being, you and I, there is nothing in our nature to suggest that we have to exist. Whether I, Sayyid Bilal Rizvi, exist or don't exist, it doesn't make a difference to the universe. There is nothing that makes it mandatory upon me to exist. So this is a fundamental point to keep in mind. So in relation to external existence, and I'm saying external existence, here I want to make another fine point. It is different for a thing to exist in the real world and the thing to exist in your mind. And this is something which is simple enough. I can think of fire in my mind, but my mind, it doesn't burn. But fire in the real world, it'll burn me. This goes to show there's a difference. When something is in the outside world, it's different than when something is in the mind. So we can have an object of thought for whom existence is necessary in itself in the outside world. I gave the example of Allah. We can have something which is contingent in the outside world. I gave the example of the human beings. And then we can have something which is impossible in the outside world. In the outside world, I will not have a square circle. A square circle only exists in my mind. In the outside world, a square circle, it does not exist. And these three categories, wajib al-wujud in the essence, necessary existent in the essence, contingent existent in the essence, and the impossible existent in the essence, can be derived through two simple questions. Two very, very simple questions. The first question is it correct to attribute existence to the object in the real world? When I have an object in my mind, a concept, can it exist in the real world? If you say no, it can't exist, then it becomes mumtani'ul wujud, impossible to exist in the real world. If you say it can exist, then there's another question. Is it mandatory for it to exist? Is it wajib for it to exist? Or can it exist? It's contingent. If you say it is wajib and necessary for it to exist, then it's wajib al-wujud in its essence. It is a necessary existent in its essence. But if you say it is contingent, then it is a contingent existence in its essence. So let me summarize very quickly these points which we need to keep in mind as we move towards the proof for God. The first point to keep in mind is that the only necessary being in the universe in itself is Allah. Allah is the only necessary being in the nature of that entity to exist in the universe. Everything besides Allah is a contingent being, meaning on its own, it requires a being to bring it into existence. Everything. In the Islamic tradition, we use the word alam. We use the word universe. The word universe means everything besides Allah. So that is the second point. But a next subtle point, which I want to make, is that in the external world, in the outside world, we cannot have anything which is impossible to exist. A square circle does not exist in the outside world. It's only in my mind. A unicorn, for example, it'll exist in my mind. It doesn't exist in the outside world. So impossible to exist in itself, by its definition, it doesn't exist in the outside world. So that is the next point. And the term repeatedly I've been using is bid'at in itself. So the next point to note is that what do I mean by this term in itself? Bid'at. For example, something being necessarily existent in itself. This is in opposition to an existent being necessary because of something else. So wajibul wujud bid'at, a necessary existent in its essence, is different from something being necessary because of other factors. And I'll explain this concept I mean, up to this point, do we have any further questions by anyone? If not, we'll continue. And I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. If somebody does not want to ask via verbally, then they can ask on the chat as well, and I can answer based upon the chat also. So
I have a quick
there is
question.
another, yes, please.
Sorry. So are we saying that the only wajibul wujud thing truly is Allah and everything else is contingent because everything else is dependent on the existence of Allah and we can only understand things based off of our own senses? Am I understanding that properly?
Well, the element of senses isn't there, but what you said originally. So what it means for wajibul wujud, for something to be the necessary existent, or Allah, we can use different terms. You know, necessary existent is one word, but Allah is the application of it. So by definition, for something to be a necessary existent, it gives existence to others. It causes others, but it by itself is uncaused. Allah himself is uncaused, but he gives existence to others. Whereas everything which is a contingent being is dependent on a source for existence. And as you'll see, that eventually as you go through the order of cause and effect, creation and something creating it, there must be a being. That being itself is uncaused and it gives existence to others. Does that answer the question, or is there any further points that I should elaborate?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So like we're saying then Allah is the only wajibul wujud and everything else is contingent on Allah.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And I'll examine why wajibul wujud, the necessary existent, can only be one. And since we're saying wajibul wujud, right now we have another important discussion. And this discussion is important to understand this proof and demonstration for the existence of God. There is a difference between something being wajibul wujud bil-dhat and wajibul wujud bil-ghayr. There is a difference between something being necessary in and of itself, meaning by its own definition it has to exist, and something existing because of other factors. This is what is being alluded to when I write in the text. Here I would like to introduce an important is ash-shay'u ma lam yajid. A thing which is not necessary will not exist. So in turn, every existing thing in the external is necessary. But there is a difference between it being necessary in itself and necessary to others. That the connection is breaking at the moment. Is it better? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad.
I hear you.
Is the connection better at this moment, or is it still breaking?
It gets choppy at times, but we can hear you.
At the moment, it's good. It's better now.
Yes, better.
Okay,
It's better.
I don't know why it's happening, but
Bismillah.
so should I restart the point? So
Can
the
you
last
please?
point I said is, yes, of course. There is a difference between something in its nature being wajibul wujud, being a necessary existent. For example, Allah, by the definition of being wajibul wujud, Allah has to exist. The necessary being has to exist. But something can have to exist because of others. And I'll explain this point very slowly because it's a fine point, but an important point. And that point is based on the philosophical principle, ash-shay'u lam yajib lam yujad. An existence which is not an existing thing, which is not necessary, will not exist. So in turn, every existing thing in the external world is necessary. The only discussion is whether it is necessary in itself or it's necessary because of others. What this means is that I gave you the example of the necessary being in itself, that by definition, God must exist. But for you and I to exist, we are necessary existence, not by our nature, but because of outside factors. Those outside factors, our parents, they coming together, the factors of risk and sustenance, when all of the outside factors are there, it is necessary for the effect to come. For example, if at this moment I begin to rub my hands together, this factor, it creates heat. There will never be a time where I don't rub my hands together and it doesn't create heat. Because all of the factors, there is a complete cause, an illatu tamma. A complete cause will always create an effect. A complete cause will always create an effect. If my pen has ink in it and I begin to write on the paper and everything is functioning properly, that ink will transfer from my pen to the paper. If everything is functioning properly, this will always occur. It is a complete cause. Now there is a difference. You and I, we have to exist, but we exist because all of the causes, the complete cause for our existence came together and it led to us existing. Whereas God in his nature must exist. So I think this is a fine point, but it's a point which this argument will hinge upon. So in conclusion, every mawjood, every existing thing outside in the world, not in the mind. The division of three things was in the mind. Every existent thing, every existent is either necessary existent in itself, it is wajib al-wujud bid-dhat, or it is a necessary existent because of others. For you, what I've written in it says the first has been. Now let us discuss the second of the two types mentioned above. An example of the second, something being necessarily existent because of others, is that when a complete cause is attained, the effect will be there. For example, when all of the prerequisites to create heat are attained, heat will be created. The complete cause cannot be found, yet its effect is absent. You cannot have the complete cause, but the effect of that cause is not there. Every time I do everything to create heat, like rubbing my hands, heat will be created. These laws, which we say the laws of physics, they do not bend. So that is an important example to keep in mind. So basically, when we say in the outside world, there's no mumtani'ul wujud, there is nothing which is impossible to exist, the following classification of the impossibility existent can be made. So in the same way, you can have wajib al-wujud in its essence, you can have the necessary being in its essence, and you can have the contingent being in its essence. You can also have something which is impossible because of others, and you can have something which is impossible in itself. So two levels of the discussion. The first was about the necessary being in itself versus the necessary being because of others. Now we're speaking about the impossible being in itself and the impossible being because of others. Now the example of something being muntani'ul wujud bid-dhat, being impossibly existent in itself, is the example of a square circle. A square circle, by the definition of the property of a square and the property of a circle, these are two contradictory definitions. Both of them cannot exist. But at the same time, something is impossible to exist because of others as well. The first has been explained via the example of a square circle. An example of the second class of the impossible existent because of others would be the absence of an effect due to the absence of a cause. What this means is that, yes, it is possible for an elephant to be in my room, but all of the causes to lead to the effect of an elephant being in my room, those causes didn't occur. So it is not something which is in itself, it's impossible. It is not impossible in itself for there to be an elephant or some other creature in my room. But it is impossible because of the other causes that lead to that. They didn't occur, thus it's not happening. And we say in philosophy that adamul illa illatun lil adam, that the absence of a cause is the reason for its absence. I'll take any questions at this point, if anyone would like any points clarified, because it's good that we understand them now before we move farther into the explanation on the proof. Is everyone following, or is the discussion a bit complex at this point?
We're following.
Okay. So to summarize, and now I'm coming towards the proof, to summarize very quickly. A contingent being, something which is mumkin al-wujud. I said mumkin al-wujud, a contingent being in its essence. It can exist or not exist. But there are two types of mumkin al-wujud. Something that is necessarily existent by other than itself. Yani wajib al-wujud bil-ghayr. Something existent because of others, necessarily existent because of others, comes under the category mumkin al-wujud. That you and I, even though in the outside world, we are necessarily existent because all of the factors for our creation came together. In our essence, by the definition of what it means to be a human being, we are something which is contingently existent. And the second thing which comes under the category contingent being, mumkin al-wujud, is impossibly existent by other than itself. Mumtani al-wujud bil-ghayr. Something does not exist, but it does not exist because the factors required for it to exist did not occur. And both of them are because of outside factors, but in their nature, they are contingent beings. They are mumkin al-wujud. And how are we doing on time at this moment? If we have Brother Mehdi who can give his input in terms of the clock.
Till 10:45, if that's okay with everyone.
We'll go with 10:45. What I'll try to do is I'll try to find a stopping point where we can finish the preliminary discussions, and tomorrow we can begin the main discussions, but there is a lot to cover over these sessions. So let us see, we'll try to find a stopping point by 10:45. So in conclusion, one must keep in mind that an entity can be contingent only in itself. It can be mumkin al-wujud bid-dat. It makes no sense to say that something is contingent because of others. Due to this self-evident fact, most of the times we simply say mumkin al-wujud. We don't say mumkin al-wujud bid-dat because that's a given. Something being contingent. You can't have an outside factor which makes something contingent being. Its inner nature dictates that it can contingent being. And with that said, we move to part 2 of our discussion. And I'll take any questions. I'll give one more opportunity for questions before moving on to the next part. Is everything clear so far? Because it's very important that we understand these 3 modes of existence before we move towards the proof. Okay, so with that said, we'll begin to move towards the proof. Now, this proof for the existence of God, which is called the proof of necessity and contingency. Now you understand the name. The name, it comes from the fact that we are arguing based upon the types of existence in the real world in relation to wujud. So in this proof, we will only discuss 2 modes of existence. We will only discuss wajib al-wujud bid-dat and mumkin al-wujud. That which is necessary in its essence, and that which is a contingent being in its essence. And over here, Allam al-Hilli, or actually to be more precise, Al-Fadul al-Miqdad, who is commentating on the work of Allam al-Hilli, and I mentioned this within the text I prepared, he mentions 5 necessary, and by necessary means they are mandatory, that by definition, these 5 categories, these 5 characteristics, they are there for wajib al-wujud, for the necessary being in itself, and he mentions 3 characteristics for the contingent being. So we'll begin to discuss the 5 characteristics of the necessary being in itself, and I'll attempt to finish these 5 characteristics. I'll mention them. There's a long discussion on number 5, but I'll try to mention as many as I can before our discuss time of 10:45. So 5 characteristics of the necessary being in itself. The first characteristic, a wajib al-wujud bid-dat, of the necessary existent in itself, is that it cannot be wajib al-wujud bid-dat and wajib al-wujud bil-ghayr at the same time. Something cannot be necessarily because of itself and be necessarily existent because of others at the same time. I'll give you the example in relation to Allah. When you say this, it would be like saying that Allah is necessary because the definition of God dictates his existence. But at the same time, Allah exists because of other factors. And it's saying my internet connection is unstable at the moment. Can everyone hear me properly?
Ji Qibla.
Okay. So what I was saying is that something cannot be a necessary being in its essence and a necessary being because of others at the same time. It doesn't make sense. If this were to be the case, then the removal of the other entity, which is necessary, would entail the absence of its existence. So if we say that the necessary being is necessary because of itself, but at the same time, it is necessary because of something else, when you remove that something else, this would mean that the necessary being is not there, because you said it is necessary because of something else also. But wait a minute. At the same time, you said that it's necessary because of itself. So how is that possible? So over here, you create a contradictory situation. And based on this contradiction, we understand that the necessary being, his existence is his essence. His essence by nature and definition cannot be conceived of without existence. Does anyone have questions about this point, or should I elaborate further upon this point before moving on to the second characteristic?
Sorry. So about this point, if you
Yes.
can maybe elaborate a little bit further, but what my thought process was that the argument of an atheist is that the concept of a higher being is there because there was a void, correct? And you touched on that base, and that because of that void, so it becomes in essence it becomes necessity for us to believe in a higher being. At the same time, it also becomes the concept of like us having to believe in the higher being. So therefore it comes, maybe I'm not wording it right, but okay. So I'm gonna try to word it a little bit better. So basically,
no pressure.
Okay, so one concept is that the necessity of a belief system because of the void. And the second system, or the second belief, is that we have to believe in it for it to exist. Does that make sense?
No. So let me clarify one thing. The first point I made up when I mentioned these atheist arguments, they say that before we didn't understand the existence of the universe because science was not strong, so we plugged in a God to understand the universe. The second point to clarify is whether we believe in God or not, God remains God. So that's the 2 points based upon your point that you mentioned. But when we come to the actual Burhan, I'll explain a lot of this more in depth. But in terms of this point, I mean, I think it's simple enough. You cannot say, let me give you an example. You cannot say Allah exists because the definition of Allah means that he exists. Yet at the same time, Allah depends on an object to exist. Because if that object is not there, then Allah doesn't exist. But on the other side, you said Allah, wajibul wujud, by its essence, its definition is to exist. So you're creating a contradiction over here. And Allah, of course, is the language of the theologians, wajibul wujud. The necessary being is the language of the philosophers. So this is the first point about wajibul wujud, the first characteristic that we need to analyze. The second characteristic of wajibul wujud is that his being and his existence are not extraneous, meaning that just by his being, his nature, he exists. They're not separate things to say the existence of God and the nature of God are separate. No, the nature of wajibul wujud dictates his existence. And this means that Allah is completely basit. Allah is completely simple. Allah is not there is nothing, his existence is not additional to him. His attributes are not additional to his dhat and his essence. This is why Imam Ali alayhi salam says that وَكَمَالُ الْإِخْلَاصِ لَهُ نَفْيُ الصِّفَاتِ أَنْهُ. that the perfection of sincerity is to not ascribe characteristic attributes to him. What this means is attributes extraneous to him. So his existence is a fixed quality that is not extra. So the first point, wajib al-wujud bid-dat cannot be wajib al-wujud bil-ghayr at the same time. The necessary being cannot be necessary in itself and because of others simultaneously. The second point is that the necessary being is completely simple. His existence is not one thing and his reality another thing. There is one reality and his reality is existence. That is the second point. The third characteristic of the necessary being is that the necessary being is not compound. He is not murakkab. What this means is that you say that God has different parts, or there are different ways to compartmentalize God. If something is compound, if you have a compound of different things, then that necessary being, then that compound, it depends on its parts. When you have a compound of 5 different things, for that compound to come into being, it depends on each of those 5 different things. If the necessary being were a compound, then the necessary being would depend on its parts that are additional to it. This would make the necessary being contingent, because we said the necessary being in its essence is something which is not dependent on anything else. But when you make it compound, then you're saying it is dependent on its part, and that which is dependent upon its parts is mumkin al-wujud. It is a contingent being. It is not a necessary being. And I'll give you a syllogism to explain this. That syllogism says, everything compound is dependent. Everything dependent is contingent. Thus, everything compound is contingent. So we've examined 3 categories. We said that wajib al-wujud cannot be necessary and it's in itself and because of others. Allah cannot be necessary by his definition and because of others. Then we said that wajib al-wujud is completely simple, completely basit, that his existence and his essence are not separate things. And now we're saying that God cannot be a compound. He cannot have parts, because that which has parts depends on its parts, and that which is dependent is a contingent being, not a necessary being. The fourth quality and the final quality that I'll examine today is that the necessary being cannot be a part of anything other than itself. If this were the case, then the necessary being would be impacted by that which is besides it. This is not possible for all besides the necessary being and its effects, meaning that we cannot say that God is part of a bigger compound, because the compound impacts its parts, and rationally the effect cannot impact the cause. An example of this type of dependence can be seen in the compound nature of matter and form, because matter is dependent on and in need of form. And I won't go into that discussion too long. As we approach 10:45, if anyone has questions, we'll take the questions. But as for the discussion, this is where I'll stop it at today until tomorrow.
I don't have any, I don't have any questions as of now, but I think we should just maybe prepare to be here a little bit longer tomorrow. I'm sure people will have a lot more questions tomorrow.
So in terms of the document that I prepared, so
Yeah.
we are on about page what? Page 5 or 6 out of 20 pages. So there's still a lot to cover, you know, potentially maybe we can extend it an extra day if things, if there is interest. But as of now, as you were saying, please come prepared and please read the document before coming. You know, I know a lot of parts you won't understand and it'll require an explanation, but do your best effort. I tried my best to write it in a way that it's self-exclamatory. But any other announcements, I'll leave to Brother Mahdi at this moment.
No more announcements as such, but Friday we were thinking of having a session, but maybe we can, if need be, use that time to elaborate and summarize this.
Inshallah. And if there's any feedback, you can please send feedback on the discussions, you know, if it's too complex or if there's parts which are not understood, I
Yeah,
am more than welcome to any feedback, and we can go from there as well.
Facebook group. So if you guys can just type below the video, this video will be available on Facebook. You guys can go and watch it one more time. I think I surely need to watch it one more time to wrap my head around all this. But inshallah, we will meet back here tomorrow at 9:15, and we will do Dua Kumal tomorrow, it being Thursday. And right after Dua Kumal, we will start the. Thank you so much, Syed Bilal, and thank you everyone for.
It's my pleasure. It's my
coming
pleasure.
in.
We'll end
Please
with the
let your
Surah
friends-
Al-Fatiha for the deceased of the community and for everyone's family members and those who don't have anyone to recite Fatiha over them. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم اللهم صل على محمد